Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Norma Holland, and I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion, Director rather, of Public Relations in the Office of Equity Inclusion at the University of Rochester Medical Center. I want to welcome you all to the URMC 21-day Racial Equity Challenge. It begins today, and we thank you so very much for being with us today. The challenge, the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge, was brought to you by the Association of Minority Residents and Fellows in partnership with the URMC Office of Equity and Inclusion. And the goal of this challenge is to engage the community in an open and safe environment in which to discuss issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are daily challenges that consist of either reading, listening, or watching a video. And the goal is to learn, reflect, and to take action. That's really what this is all about. And so it is a real honor for us to bring this to you at the same time as Black History Month. Speaking of which, we are honored to welcome pediatric and clinical psychologist Dr. Dana Crawford as our first speaker this month. Dr. Crawford is currently a scholar in residence at Columbia University in the Zuckerman Mind-Brain Behavior Institute. She developed the Crawford Bias Reduction Theory and Training, or CBRT, a systematic approach to reducing bias, prejudice, and racism. We thank you so very much for joining us today, Dr. Crawford, and I'll leave you to present.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining, and congratulations for being able to be in a space. I know that some of you are in the thick of snow, pandemic parenting, and that the weather where you are may be really challenging. So I'm really thankful that we're able to join together today. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides for you all. And so the title of this talk is Turning Awareness into Action. I know many of you know a lot of things, especially when we talk about the concepts of racism, prejudice, and bias. But my hope is in the short time that we have together today is that you'll be able to take that knowledge that you have and move it into an actionable step. A bit of housekeeping before we get into the thick of it. I like to use QR codes for my information, for different references throughout my presentations. And I use QR codes for a variety of reasons. And if you're not familiar, a QR code is that black and white box that's on the bottom. This one is to the link to a website, The Door, which is my charity of choice that serves about 12,000 youth, 12 to 24 around New York City. And so the reason I use a QR code is one, because I have been to so many trainings and I say I'm going to look something up later and I don't. So my hope is by making it as a QR code, you'll have it right there on your phone. The second reason is that although I value the beauty and the importance of academic knowledge, I literally did all the school, was no more school. I also recognize, one, the privilege of being in an academic space, and two, the reality that I know a lot of people who have a lot less letters behind their names that are way smarter than me. And so I like to use QR codes to amplify community knowledge, not just academic knowledge. And lastly, I use QR codes. So if you like something I share, you don't have to wait for me to share my slides. And you're like, is she going to share the slides? What happened to the slide? Here is the link right here, right now. And so my hope is that the QR codes increase our awareness as well as increase our access. Now, I have been in about 200 plus Zoom spaces in the last year in terms of just presentations that I've given. The year before, about the same, so about 400 Zoom spaces. And I don't know about you all, but Zoom really can create a space of presenteeism, where your physical body is in a place, but mentally you are multitasking, right? So you might be checking your email, texting somebody, trying to do another project or presentation. You might even be talking in the room, right? So you're physically here, but maybe you're not mentally here. I'm wondering today if this Zoom space can be a little bit different. Can you actually be here? And when I say be here, I mean your brain, your thoughts, but I also mean your spirit, your soul, and I dare say the G word, God. Can all of that be here today? And I say that specifically in the realm of spirituality and religion, and the experience that I've had where I interviewed therapists around the country and asked them, how does culture show up in the therapy room, in the exam room for you? And many of them talked about when times got hard, where they were having those tender conversations that were specifically about things that are anchored in culture. They prayed. They literally said, "Oh, God, help me. I don't know what I'm about to say. I don't know what to do," right? And asked for guidance from that belief system. So if that's your space, I invite you to bring that in here today with us. We need all the resources that we can get in this dismantling of racism, prejudice, and bias. The next I ask you to bring in is your observing self. And so, in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is part of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, an evidence based practice, what we do know is that there is a conversation that happens in one's head. And that conversation might be, I am angry, right? And the very notion and the ability to say, I am angry, not I feel angry only, is that you are observing an experience. You're naming an experience, you're observing an experience. And so that observing space, that observing self is sort of like if your thoughts and your feelings were playing a tennis match. Boom, I feel this. Boom, the name of that feeling is anger. Yeah, boom, boom, great tennis match. The observing self is the person in the stands. The observing self is the coach. And so I'm inviting you to bring in that self today where you're able to recognize your feelings and thoughts, but not become so immersed in them, but instead to observe them. Now, I know there's some big things that's going to keep that observing self from being here, from all parts of you being here. Number one, if your institution is like every other institution that I've spoken to this week, you are overstaffed, you are understaffed, and you are overworked, right? You are exhausted. We are all so time impoverished. COVID fatigue. This last wave, whoo, I don't know about y'all, but I'm so over it. I was over it before, but now I'm over it to the top of the mountain. I'm over it. What else might be keeping you from being present? Put it in the chat. Let's hear it. And often it can be really nice to be able to hear those things because it's not just you having that experience. So I invite you right now, what are the things that are keeping you from being able to be present? And the reason I ask you this, what's keeping you from being present, is that I know that there's always a really good reason not to be present. There's always a good reason to be thinking about the past and thinking about what you got to do. Yet, in truth, this moment is really the only moment we have, the current moment we're in. And I think that it is everyone's human right to be able to be in your current moment. Give yourself the gift of being present. And to help you receive that gift, I'm going to invite you to engage in some mindfulness. Just 1 minute. This 1 minute, in a moment, you're not going to hear anything. It's going to give you some instructions with a little bit of a bell. And then it's going to be a moment of silence, of just looking at water. And I invite you in that moment to wrap up whatever it is you need to do. If it's that, send that email, wrap that up. If it's that thought, maybe you're arguing with your whole partner, whatever it is that you need to do internally or externally to be together for the next 42 minutes, let's do that. So for some of you, that minute felt like a waste of time. Don't we need to get into the content? For others of you, it might have been a little bit more challenging to get into it. And then when you settled into it, bing, the time was up. For some of us, that minute felt like, oh, yeah, that's what I needed. One of the greatest ways to keep change from happening is to keep people from having time to think. And as we think about turning this work from awareness, which are our thoughts, to action, we need to give ourselves time, slow down, so we can not cope, but instead engage. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. I already went through the QR codes, but I want to be really clear from the outset because I don't want anyone to have any false impressions and say, oh, well, why didn't she do this? This is not a DEI 101 training. I don't actually do those anymore because I'm just getting a little too old to keep saying the same things. But the real reasons that I don't do DEI trainings are number one, I think that there are some amazing people out there, especially since February, March 2020, people that have created amazing resources that can educate you about DEI to the point now that you don't actually have to have a person be live. It's a lot of asynchronistic, amazing books, resources. You can literally Google DEI for beginners. And I have found a lot of people don't do that. They are more willing to Google and research the best water bottle to get on Amazon and look at 20 different reviews, but they won't research racism. They won't research bias and prejudice and what certain things do. And so I invite you to do that. If you're not familiar with what I use, what I talk about today, you can Google it. The other thing is I think it's actually quite harmful in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging to constantly define very basic terms and to teach to the least educated person in the room. I think of it, to give a really crass metaphor, I think of it as if, as a therapist, I decided to work in a therapy center that worked with rape survivors. And with my first patient, I said, well, what does rape even mean? That is very harmful. It's condescending. It does not see the person. So I think it's really critical that we are constantly striving to level up our education, not teach to the least knowledgeable. And I think that really leads to an ineffective change if we always start over with defining, what does diversity mean? What does racism mean? But I also recognize that you might have not known that before you came to the talk today. So here are two glossaries that I love. One is Love Has No Labels. The other is Racial. I think you all may even have this in your 21-day challenge. A really great glossary. What I love about racial equity tools is they define some terms that get a little provocative to define, like, what is the definition of whiteness? I'll talk more about that in a moment. But these two glossaries, you might choose to have them open while I'm speaking to look up, like she said, BIPOC. What does BIPOC mean? It means Black, Indigenous, peoples of color. The other housekeeping thing that I'm inviting you to do is 3 points. Move your pen or your pencil. Write down your thoughts. Reflect. If something comes up and you're like, oh, I like how she said that, or oh, I didn't like that kind of thing. Oh, that made a lot of sense. Oh, I want to do some more work on that. Write it down. I think journaling is a gift to your future self. It'll feel so good at the end of this 21-day challenge, at the end of this month-long challenge, to be able to look back and see where you started. And also, it gives you a chance to go back to those old thoughts that you had and have a relationship with yourself in your own growth. The other thing is move your jaw. This work cannot be passive learning. The distance from the couch to the world needs to be a lot shorter. We can't just sit in that space. Instead, we have to be thinking about this third point. How do we move to action? So everything that I shared today, I invite you to be thinking about, how can I make that actionable? What would that look like if my internal values, my internal world, my internal goal of being a great person that creates spaces of inclusion, what could that look like externally? So, all right, that's the housekeeping. We begin this conversation. It's always so hard for me because I'm constantly looking for ways to be more effective in talking about and reducing racism, prejudice, and bias. And not just talking about it, but doing it. What does it look like in my life? And so because I live that space all the time, like dreaming about these things, wake up talking about them, journaling. I got this huge board where I literally write on the wall trying to figure these things out. I often want to start the conversation with my last aha moment. But that doesn't really work because you weren't there for the moment before, right? And you're going to be like, what are you talking about, Dana? Why are you talking about misogynoir and the ways that it shows up in anti-racism? I don't know what you mean. So I decided a good way to enter any of these conversations is to talk about the concept of the cultural consciousness wave, is what I call it. And what I think this is a time when humans are just like living our best lives. And then something so terrible, or even our worst lives, it doesn't even have to be your best life. You're just living your life in your own bubble, in your own silo. And something so terrible happens that you have to stop and say, you know what? We need to be better at humaning. We need to do better. People need to stand up. We need to protest. We need to give resources. We need to figure this thing out. And this cultural consciousness wave, for some, it can be really global and big, huge things like the recorded murder of George Floyd. Or it can be things that are more within your own community, something that happened locally, something that is happening in the professional space. And we know that racism, prejudice, and bias is everywhere. It's a thread within the quilt of our humanity. And so some of the ways that it shows up, that cultural consciousness wave, it might be in academics, right? Maybe there was this one professor who did this one thing and you're like, oh my goodness, we have sexism in our institution. Maybe it had to do with hiring and promotion, and you realize that people were making less money than someone else based on their gender. Maybe it has to do with business, and you applied for a business loan and you realize that certain people get higher interest rates than others. Maybe it's related to religion. As Malcolm X said, that high noon on Sunday is the most segregated day in American culture. Maybe it's related to health, and you're thinking about the reality that a Black female doctor is 3 to 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than a 17-year-old white girl in a trailer park. Maybe it has to do with the criminal legal system, and I dare not ever call it a criminal justice system because that's very subjective. And so thinking about all the ways that it shows up, then we see the cultural consciousness wave where people collectively, not just in our own little silos, but as a world, as a country, as a society, as a state, as a county, you may come together and have social activism. And these are some of the most recent ones that have come up in the last few months, years. And I've recognized that even attempting to make a slide like this, I'm missing countless marginalized, minoritized, oppressed voices. But some of these may ring a bell. I think, stop Islamophobia, stop Asian hate, stop anti-Semitism, free Palestine, ableism, equity versus equality, stop racism, Me Too, rights for LGBTQIA plus community. And all of these things lead us to react. These are starting. I ran track my whole life, and my coaches would often say that Olympic medals are won in the starting blocks. And so the starting blocks are really these little devices that you're supposed to put your feet in and push off. And so the starter shoots a gun, pow, and you run as fast as you can, right? And so the faster you get out of the blocks, you kind of get a little leap in the race. But what I have found in this cultural consciousness wave is oftentimes we just react. Especially now that cancel culture is so huge. How many times have people been like, oh, I got to send out an email. I have to make sure we respond. And people have literally been canceled because they didn't respond fast enough. And some of the responses, come on. So I remember when there was a recorded murder of George Floyd, I got an email from a sneaker company, and it said in the ad, we don't want you to only wear our shoes. We want you to walk in them. And I'm like, okay, like, what is this, right? And I think about right now, it's Black History Month, and I saw some candle company that is selling candles for unity, right? And where are those resources going? It's all this reactivity. Sometimes it's anchored in capitalism and ego. And when I see these things happen in response to the cultural consciousness wave, it really has to do with the fact that we are underskilled and have not been educated on how to respond, right? We just react. And what do you do as an institution, as organization? The biggest reaction that I have seen many, many times is more training. We need to have more training. And those trainings look like multiculturalism, cultural competency, cultural humility, anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And my favorite recent one, JEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and ideas, right? So all of these trainings that occur, and what changes? The other space, a lot of people saying, well, how can we have diversity? How can we have inclusion if we don't have diversity? We need to recruit more diverse candidates. We need to bring in more diverse candidates. Mind you, it's a lot of bringing people in to fix problems, but yet you haven't engaged or even prepared the space for them to enter and feel comfortable or even want to be there. And so in this approach of traditional diversity training, I see 5 core issues being really problematic and really inviting us to become more innovative and to move from this awareness to action. The first is othering. And so I remember, when I was in grad school and even having to do continuing education credits and CMEs, usually there's something like how to work with African American families, how to work with LGBTQI plus families, how to work with Latinx, right? But now it's Hispanic, but maybe it's Latino, depending on the space. As we get better at hearing each other, we get better at explaining who we are and get more nuanced, right? These chapters, it might be an agenda on how to work with Jewish families, a lot of different things on how to work with whom. Sometimes it's families, sometimes it's individuals, different types of patients, how to supervise, how to mentor. But I have never seen anything that said how to work with white people. And I've never seen anything that said how to work with white men. And what that does is it makes whiteness in general and white maleness specifically the standard, and everyone else is other. And so we need special times to try and figure out these other folks, which is a subconscious thing, what it does. The other thing is typically you go to these trainings and there's usually someone who's experienced oppression, some beautiful Black woman in an orange dress, right? Some beautiful person, some amazing person who shares their trauma porn. And they tell you all of the ways that their specific community and other communities, being inclusive, have been oppressed, marginalized, minoritized. But what that does is it often leaves little space to talk about intra-cultural traumas, intra-cultural bias. For example, what does anti-racism or anti-Blackness rather look like within the Black community? What does queer phobia and anti-Blackness look like in the Hispanic community, right? What does Asian hate look like within the Black community? What are these intersectionalities that are not centering whiteness? The next piece is the very concept of whiteness. The creation of the term goes underexplored. We don't even talk about how whiteness was invented, and what impact does that actually have? So rather than thinking about white supremacy, I'm thinking about white toxicity and the ways that the concept of whiteness, not white people, but the concept of whiteness harms. The next is the point I've already made, that you increase your awareness, and then what are you supposed to do? I've read this horrific statistic of Black women and maternal mortality. What are you supposed to do with that? And lastly, this language of anti-bias work being positioned as an endless journey, you're never going to arrive. Listen, life is short. We're going to have to do something, right? It can't just be, we're going to never arrive at this point. We need some measurable destinations. The next generation really needs us to do things. And the truth of the matter is diversity trainings alone, they don't work. There's every few years, there are studies that show diversity trainings, especially implicit bias trainings, don't change things. And it breaks my heart because I remember right after the recorded murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, everybody was doing these trainings. Everybody was blowing up my phone, emailing me, do these one and done trainings. And what actually changes? I theorize that the pathway to change looks like changing hearts, minds, and skills. It includes policies, practices, and procedures. It's power, accountability, and healing. And so often people talk about, having a seat at the table being the critical components of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is a quote that's been going around in the last few months on LinkedIn and on other social media pieces that really, places that really aim to expand that metaphor of having a seat at the table. That accessibility is being able to get in the building. Diversity is getting invited to the table. Inclusion is having a voice at that table. And belonging is having your voice heard at that table. That's deep. And it's like, yeah, that hits it. Wrong. No, it doesn't. It's not even it, right? When I think about this quote, it's really nice and it makes a lot of sense as a concept. But really, where change will happen is when a diverse interculturally competent, people that can navigate different cultural spaces and are not monocultural, people being able to hold multiple spaces that I can understand you within the context of your culture and as an individual. And it's not either or. No, we shouldn't put people in groups. Yes, we should put people in groups. Actually, maybe we can understand people in their group and as an individual. We can do both. We don't have to be binary in our thinking and in our resources. And it's really when interculturally competent people come together that they're equity driven, that they are aiming to create the buildings, let alone get in the building. I would imagine if you use a wheelchair, if you built the building, I wouldn't have to ask you how you're getting in because you would have already planned that because you are having that experience and you know it. It's being able to sit together and understand and to communicate with compassion. This cancel culture, I think about 3 years ago, maybe 4, I was really like, yes, cancel. Like if somebody is racist, they are out of here. Like people, and now, as I evolved in my consciousness and my awareness and my experiences, I realized that you can cancel someone. Say your grandfather is saturated with racism. I wouldn't say your grandfather is a racist because I don't believe that's a permanent identity. I think it's a moment in time and then people continue doing those things. Anyway, that's another talk. But let's say your grandfather is saturated in racism and you say, I'm canceling him, like it is done. If your grandfather is the CEO of a company, you canceling him, the person that he loves in the world, the person that actually probably has the most power to change his perspective because of the heart and the mind connection, if you cancel him, he is going to have an entire organization that he is out here creating harm for. I actually think it's a lot more powerful to have compassion and to constantly engage in hard, tender conversation and to really be able to take a restorative justice approach. And so what does this look like in a less abstract way? It really means intervention happening at every single level at the same time. As an individual, it means being able to reduce bias, prejudice, and racism by learning anti-bias skills. I got to look in the mirror at my whole self and not a quick glance, like she's got her whole eyelid, like what is happening, right? I got to look deep at areas that I might not want to see or I haven't noticed before. Then I take that knowledge that I have of self and those skills that I've developed because of that knowledge, and then I implement it with someone else and I practice it. And then I'm culturally humble and they give me feedback like, nope, that's the wrong language. Yes, that's right. Oh, how you said that. And then we're able to have this space of compassion and learning. Then we bring together that same interpersonal experiences to the institution. And the reality is a lot of people love to say systemic racism, institutional, right? And point up there, it's not me, it's institutional. But guess who makes up institutions? People. They are not done by robots. It's us. We are institutions. Institutional racism, right? Institutional bias and prejudice. And so it's about having the accountability in this space and the accountability of our power, our policies, our procedures, our systems. And so for some of you, you might be like, well, this is great. I don't have a racist bone in my body. And, I hope that's nobody. But it's interesting because even thinking about this work in a Black space, people have said, well, Black people can't be racist. And like, how are you going to tell me I need to be doing a whole conversation about racism? Or white folks who say, I'm not racist. I don't believe in that. That's not who I am. I wasn't raised that way. The reality is we are all infected with racism, prejudice, and bias. I think it's a socially transmitted disease. And so your version of your STD might not look the same as mine. Maybe, I've done a lot of work related to internalized racism and the ways that I perceive people, but maybe I have a whole ableism issue and I haven't addressed the fact that I have an invisible disability and I haven't processed that and I haven't gone through a path through that. So I have a lot of judgment, right? And so my area might be here, yours might be there, but you still got this STD. And I want to be clear when I say that, we are all infected with racism, prejudice, and bias. I'm not talking about like burning crosses or threatening people and killing people. I don't even think that's racism, prejudice, and bias. It's hate. It's criminal. It's disgusting, right? I'm talking about us as well-intentioned people that are out here trying to make the world a little bit better, definitely not worse, and we're not getting it right. And the reason we're not getting it right is because we have been socialized to distribute our resources based on social identities, social categories, and not just race ones, some of them anchored in class. Racism, prejudice, and bias are tools for distributing resources, to identify how to get those resources, how to replicate those resources, how to control those resources. And it starts at a very young age. As young as 3 months old, we see babies looking at the faces that match their caregivers more. And why is that? I theorize it's because of milk, right? The baby's like, these people, you look like people who give me milk. You look like people who change my diaper. You look like people who snuggle me. So I'm going to be looking for people who look like you, right? Babies are kind of blind at that younger age, or kind of their vision is a little bit different, but their ability to recognize culture and race starts so early. And so that system then gets perfected and educated and taught through all of the little micro ways that parents share in the community and all of the things we watch. And then you go to work. And oftentimes we think that we can go to work and that erases our early learning experiences, right? But in fact, as we start to work, it amplifies our fear of losing our resources because there is more at stake. And some of the resources that we may fear losing in the workplace are our money. You need a paycheck, right? You got to eat. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, I need food, right? That's the resource. It may be your funding. But we also need things like our reputation, our prestige. It impacts hiring and promotion. If I speak out in this way, if I stand out in this way, if I point out, if I call in or call out, I might get fired. The power and the agency that you have, even the fact that I could speak about these things so candidly at this point, has to do with the stage and the age that I'm in my career, right? When I was 22, I might not be able to do these things power-wise. And so what CBRT does is really try to make a systematic approach to navigating these things. And it starts with the brilliance and our history of knowing diversity work of awareness. You can't talk about or change what you don't know about. And so it's recognizing racism, prejudice, and bias as a socially transmitted disease, not a character issue. I know some lovely people who are saturated with racism, prejudice, and bias. Some of my kids call them auntie and uncle, and I call them grandma, grandpa, cousins, friends, right? And it's not about your character. And we have to really get away from giving a totality of a person based on their belief systems. Like, this is who you are. People are so much more nuanced than that. It's the awareness of my own STD, how it gets activated, and how I typically cope with that activation. It's the investigation of knowing what it looks like. What does individual, interpersonal, and institutional racism, prejudice, and bias looks like? How does it manifest? And lastly, then we're able to reduce. And reducing in a way that we are not reactive, but we're value-driven. We are not lying and being performative. We are authentic and trustworthy. It is mindfulness. Racism, prejudice, and bias, the thing is sneaky. The language changes, the definition changes. Literally, the laws will change based on racism, prejudice, and bias. The legal system will change to fit certain groups, right? And you have to be mindful. If you think you can get a hold on these things by being texting on your phone and you're gonna catch racism, it's gonna run by so fast and you don't even know it's sitting in the room looking you dead in the face, right? Strategic, sustainable action. And I stress this as strategy and being sustainable. Some of you all joined this call today and you've gone to all of the trainings in your organization. You're that person that everybody else knows. She's going to be there. They're going to be there. He's going to show up, right? And some of y'all tired because you've been doing this work and you're not even tired, you burnt out. You're not even burnt out, you crispy. You like that, them crumbs when people frying things, right? And so we have to think about, how do we engage this work in a sustainable way? And that's really, in some ways, about our resources. And when our resources are in question, we get activated. We have different feelings, different thoughts, different physical sensations, and then you react. And some of you might be like, well, shouldn't I react? Like, these are horrible things. Some of the things that you shared are horrific. Of course you should react. I mean, what are you saying? I shouldn't have reactivity? The goal is to be able to engage with the activation, not cope with it. And so more specifically, what I mean is this activation where something doesn't feel good, it feels harmful, it might even be traumatic. And when that activation happens, you cope by avoiding it, by critiquing it, by trying to control. And then you end up having ineffective communication. That ineffective communication is very disorienting, and you might be gaslit or gaslight someone else where you're like confused. Am I being too sensitive? Are they being too sensitive? How many new terms do we have to learn? Like, oh my God, right? You get in that space, you center yourself, So we're talking about Black Lives Matter, and you're like, but what about trans rights, right? We can't hold the space. We get in this trauma Olympic space where there's a fight over resources and attention, right? I think about Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and people are like, well, which one are we going to focus on, right? Because it's resources. And then we get in these caretaking behaviors where we engage with our allies in a way that when they become upset, we want to caretake them and rescue them from the painful insights of the reality of privilege. And then the work ends up being really performative, and you get emails about shoes, right? And burnt out. And then it becomes really hard to care. And I find the older I get, the more I have to fight for my compassion. And so what Let Up is, it's an internal processing model to regulate and engage with that activation rather than just coping with it. And so the first part is listening. And it's listening to what gets activated within you. It's actually not listening to the person who's activating, it's listening to your internal voice. It's that observing self, right? And it looks like effectively listening, oh, I feel anger, I feel sadness, I feel excitement. Maybe it's not always just negative, like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I finally get to work with this one group and this one population. You're not excited about them. You're excited because of stuff within you that's unresolved that you haven't processed. Behaviorally, it looks like zoning out, checking your email, your phone, turning your camera off in Zoom and not paying attention. Cognitively, it's judgment. It's diagnosing, well, you know, they're bipolar, so it's because of this, right? You don't even know anything about them. You're not even a therapist, but you gave them a whole diagnosis. It's flashbacks from your own childhood and experiences that you've had. And it's excessive curiosity. It's really looking at a person as a caricature of who they are rather than the totality of their character. And then physically, it's that heart palpitation, dry mouth, tense muscles. And what do when that happens? We often avoid. We disconnect from the activation and focus on something we feel more comfortable with. We have silence. And sometimes that silence is really passive, like, well, I'm here to learn, so I'm just going to listen. You're here to engage and heal. Sometimes we use humor in ways that are not funny and not funny, like but we use humor in ways that are inappropriate. And then we shift the focus to something else. We also get in a superhero mode where we have this exaggerated sense of responsibility. We're in a savior complex. We have a dependency that we're viewed as a helper, as an ally. And honestly, at this point in my life, I'm not even interested in an ally. I'm interested in an abolitionist. Like, you out here trying to abolish, not partner, let's abolish together. It looks like being driven by guilt and fragility. Like, I just feel so bad, so I have to do this work. And it's really about trying to help, but you haven't listened. The other way we cope is becoming really critical, where we get angry and irritable and we have these heated arguments and we're sarcastic and we're CCing people on emails that don't need to be CC'd, and back to that diagnosis. And so we can have all the awareness in the world. We can be able to name a thing so smoothly, but until we're able to stop being driven by our fears of our resources being adjusted, we will not reduce racism, prejudice, and bias. And so I'm going to invite you to engage with the activation. I'm going to play a video. I'm aware it may be activating. That's why it says activation warning. Somebody on a survey recently was like, do you know your videos are activating? I'm like, it literally said activation warning. As you watch this video of 12-year-olds talking about their experience of racism, prejudice, and bias, move your pen. What are your reactions? And how do you think you would cope? Are you the avoider? Are you the superhero? Are you the critic? Here's the video.
Haiti and Nigeria. Like 3 things, like I'm Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Black. I'm biracial. I have an African-American father and an Irish-American mom.
My name's Lamine. I'm Muslim.
I'm Indian, British, Scottish, and American.
My parents are from Venezuela, and I was sharing like one of the foods that we eat, and then I got made fun of. They were like, "What is that? Ew. Oh, ew, what is that?" And like I cried, because I felt like, oh, there's something wrong where I'm from. Like maybe like it's bad, like I'm different.
I am an African-American adopted girl, only child, and I live with my 2 dads.
I remember when I was younger, I went with my family to a restaurant, and they made us pay in advance just in case we didn't pay afterwards, and that was kind of upsetting.
You start to notice that people are different and you have comments, they might be racist or they might not be, but by the time you get older, you know that it is racist and you should stop.
I feel a little scared about if I, just walk down the street, cops might just think I'm doing something bad, and then if I try to explain to them, they won't listen and then just start beating me up and doing terrible things to me.
I think there's this anxiety that kind of comes with being biracial, that kind of eats away at you, almost like you have to prove yourself that you're one or the other. For example, I hear the phrase, "You're not black," all the time.
People sometimes think that I'm supposed to talk ghetto or whatever that is.
Oh, she's uneducated because she's African American.
Because I'm Hispanic or Latino, I can't have a lot of money.
Just this weekend, I went with my friend to Urban Outfitters and we were shopping, and I really wanted to try on this dress, and then this lady that was just there, she was kind of watching me, and I'm just I'm not gonna steal it or anything.
I think white privilege is the idea that in your everyday life you're getting treated differently and sometimes with more respect, or people just trust you more, or they have certain expectations of you, like you might be smarter or you might be wealthier because you're white. It makes me feel guilty sometimes, even though it's not my fault. I feel guilty for having a privilege that I don't deserve.
If I was ever the mayor or something that controls the policeman, I would want to go out and look in the neighborhoods where there are people that's very friendly, so you can pick them instead of these guys that's just doing all this training. It's better to pick people that's more minded with the community than to just pick some new guy and get on the street. It's just not gonna work out.
We have these kids from, they're Ecuadorian, and they get made fun of because they look Mexican, and they get told on a daily basis, "Oh, you like tacos? Oh, you like churros? How come I saw your mom on the corner selling ices?" I feel bad for them personally, because I'm wow, they're not, and even though they tell them I'm not Mexican, I'm Ecuadorian, they still get teased.
So in watching that video, what gets activated for you? What affective behavioral, cognitive, and physical things come up? What kid did you really connect with? And so what Let Up is about is moving from this activated and coping place to this engaged space where you're able to listen to what's happening internally, empathize, not with the activating source, but with yourself, and asking yourself, what do I need to do to be able to engage rather than cope? Then it's about talking and setting your priority. And it might be talking with that activating source, or it might be talking and processing somewhere else to do that internal work. Then it's about understanding the bigger picture, that a lot of this isn't about you. It's about all this history and all of this socially transmitted disease and the resources and all of these things that are not anchored within you personally. And then it's about a plan. What are you going to do about it? And so what do I mean? What do I need to be able to engage rather than cope? I need a clear understanding of my values. Why am I doing this work? Why do I care? Why am I sitting in this space that might be uncomfortable for me? How can I be honest about what I'm actually experiencing, and how can I be present? Then it's about talking and setting a priority. It's really thinking in this moment, if I'm activated and I'm aiming to engage, what would the conversation look like if I wasn't so activated? How can I get to a specific goal? And so some of the priorities that you might have is just to give information. You want to be objective, you want to point out. So for example, one of the kids in the video, and she's like, how come I saw someone says, how come I see your mother on the corner selling ices, right? And you're having this conversation. And it might be, actually, that's a pretty racist thing to say. That's classist, that's, anchored in nationalism, and it's pretty harmful to say. I want to preserve the relationship. So you might use grace. You might call in. You might say, well, why would you say something like that? What was that about? What made you think that that was okay? And that comment that you shared would be helpful? What made you think that? Tell me more about your experience. So I'm calling in. I want to speak up for what I believe in. So I'm calling out, you know what, that's dead wrong. I don't want to hear that language again. If you're around me, that is not what's going to be acceptable. If I hear you talk about that or talk that way again, I'm going to have to leave, right? And so it's about integrity. I'm calling out. And then lastly, it may be preventing further harm. And it's not necessarily with the source of the activation, but it might be for the community. So you might be thinking about who heard this comment? What occurred? I think about this in Zoom spaces where sometimes a very public comment is made and then people offer private support. So let me private chat you like, oh, that was terrible. But if it's a public wrong, you should have a public repair, not a private support. And so it's really about listening and restoring and supporting. And as we navigate these spaces of listening, of engaging, of empathy, of talking, we have to understand the impact, not the intention, right? So I have to think about all the multicultural identities that I have and how those identities intersect and recognize that we all have work to do, but it's not the same work. If you are seated in an experience that's about your socially oppressed identity, it's going to be different than an experience of someone that is seated in their socially privileged identities, right? And these are groups that are sorted by American US experiences. I know these groups of socially oppressed and socially privileged groups are going to look different in different settings. And then that intersectionality about power and how all of these social identities collide and impact with each other, and where there is space for change, where there is space for accountability. And so when we think about the plan, it goes back to that original point of the individual work where you're out here training, right? You're learning these skills, you're doing some individual running. Interpersonally, you're coming together collectively, learning some things, practicing some things. And then institutionally, it's all of the structures that support that collective experience. It's all of the structures that support that individual experience. And what are the policies, the procedures, the accountability that we need to support that? And so, you know, after all of this talk, you might be thinking, okay, well, what's next? Now, I have heard that you all have heard of a 21-day challenge. And I looked at the PDF and wow, I was amazed. It is a very beautiful challenge. However, there's some elephants in the room that I don't know if they've been addressed. It's going to take some time. Some of those things on that list, I was like, when I watched that documentary, it took me 6 months to recover from what I saw, right? The energy that's going to be involved, your health. I have literally gotten a headache from sexism before. Like my head was fine. Sexism came through the door. I didn't get a calendar invite. Nobody told me it was coming. It was an uninvited party guest, was all in my house. And now my head hurts, right? Our motivation. This work is hard. And to be willing to be uncomfortable, to be motivated that what's on the other side is repairing this humanitarian crisis. What's on the other side is doing this work in a way that we're able to be a lot more innovative and more humane. It's going to be a labor. You're going to have to think about things, your intellect. It may even impact your relationships. And so what I invite you all to do is to make a plan to engage in the challenge. Just don't start clicking on the links and reading the stuff. Individually, what are your values? Why are you doing it? How can you be authentic? And how are you going to be present? Interpersonally, as you have these conversations, you might have to let up, right? You may be activated with people and possibly having an accountability partner. Institutionally, I think you all have to think about what space that people can have to be able to engage in this challenge in a meaningful way and not in a way that ends up being performative. It goes back to that pathway of change of looking in the mirror, building those relationships and coming back to the table and making sure the infrastructure supports these things. And so in short, you can do all this 21-day challenge, you can have all this awareness, but unless you manage this piece related to all the affective, behavioral, cognitive, physical reactions and the resources associated with that, you're not going to be able to reduce racism, prejudice, and bias. And so I end with this video that I think really does a beautiful job of showing how racism, prejudice, and bias show up, and how do you navigate that system on an individual level and on an interpersonal level. I think it's our work to think about institutionally, how do we support? It's a conversation between a father and son talking about racism, prejudice, and bias.
Do you remember what was going through your head when you first saw me?
I remember when the doctor pulled you out, the first thing I thought was that he was being too rough with you. And he actually held you like a little Sprite bottle, and he was like, here's your baby. That was the most proud moment of my life. Don't tell your brothers, because it's three of y'all. But it was like looking at a blank canvas and just imagining what you want the painting to look like at the end, but also knowing you can't control the paint strokes. You know, the fear was just, I got to bring up a black boy in Mississippi, which is a tough place to bring up kids, period. But there are statistics that say black boys born after the year 2002 have a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison. And all three of my sons were born after the year 2002.
So, Dad, why do you take me to protest so much?
I think I take you for a bunch of reasons. One is that I want you to see what it looks like when people come together, but also that you understand that it's not just about people that are familiar to you, but it's about everybody. Did you know the work that Martin Luther King was doing was for everybody and it wasn't just for black people?
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah. So that's how you got to think. If you decide that you want to be a cab driver, then you got to be the most impactful cab driver that you can possibly be.
Are you proud of me?
Of course. You my man. I just love everything about you, period.
The thing I love about you never give up on me. That's one of the things I will always remember about my dad.
You said it like I'm on the way out of here or like I'm already gone.
So, Dad, what are your dreams for me?
My dream is for you to live out your dreams. It's an old proverb that talks about when children are born, children come out with their fists closed because that's where they keep all their gifts. And as you grow, your hands learn to unfold because you're learning to release your gifts to the world. And so for the rest of your life, I want to see you live with your hands unfolded.
And so my hope is by this presentation, some of the things that I shared today, that this will help you live more with your hands unfolded. Thank you for listening. This last QR code is for a survey because I'm always trying to evolve and grow in my work. It's just for me. If we were in person, you might applaud, you might boo, you might stand up after and get to chat by the water cooler, but we don't have those things. And so the survey is my ability to my hope to create a space where we can have feedback and that we can learn. But we do have a few minutes for question and answer. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And I think we can open it up for questions and comments. I'm also going to drop a link to the survey if you'd like to complete it. I think I can put it in the chat box and maybe someone can put it somewhere else for me. Oh, here we go. I can chat. Questions, comments?
Thank you so much, Dr. Crawford. They're incredible. We do have a couple, so let's get right to them. One of them was, this is from Joshua. How do you talk with your superiors? So, how do you bring this up, when you've got these thoughts or these feelings with people that are in leadership or powerful positions?
Mm-hmm. So it's such an interesting question because I think that question of how do you talk to your superiors is a global question. So if you are generally a person that is able to talk to your superiors, you're not needing mentorship on how to have a conversation with a supervisor, you've done that work, but yet when racism, prejudice, and bias shows up, then it becomes the question. To me, what Let Up is really about is internally regulating, then you are able to access the skills that you typically use, right? So if I'm able to talk with my supervisor about anything else, but for whatever reason, when it comes to this one area, my first thing that I need to do is think about what is it about this that's so activating for me? And how am I coping with that? I'm avoiding. Okay, why am I avoiding? What do I need to not avoid, right? And what's my priority in this conversation? And you walk yourself through a point where you're no longer activated, but then you have access to whatever those clinical, whatever those professional skills might mean. It may mean that you need to develop some more professional skills. You might need some mentorship in this area. You might need some professional development. But the first part of this, if it's just about this issue of culture, is really to be able to regulate internally.
I love that you said that racism is really a socially transmitted disease, and along those lines, one of our attendees asks, how do you talk to your fellow minorities about our own bias? How do you bring that up?
You already know, Norma, my answer is going to be first start with let up. So I think it starts with being able to regulate. But for me, on a day-to-day level, I constantly get questions about, can Black people be racist, right? Like, we can't be racist. And I do think there was a point in time that Black people maybe couldn't be racist because of power dynamics. But I definitely know, if I think about racism on an individual, interpersonal, and institutional level, if I'm talking about interpersonally, absolutely. No one is liberated from the interpersonal biases that show up. Like, a Black person can be racist towards their neighbor, right? Or prejudiced towards their neighbor. How much structure do they have to make really big power changes institutionally? That's a different thing. But I think within my own community, I like to start from a space of grace. When a lot of the Asian American community violence was happening in New York, I saw a lot of the community being like, well, that's not our issue. And so I think it's dialogue and being willing to listen, to explore. I think the other pieces that where I've seen internalized racism, prejudice, and bias occur is usually when there's a question about resources. This group is getting too much attention. Why are we talking about that group? Why? And when we get into that space of like the trauma Olympics of who has it worse, I like to remind people of the ways that resources is a tool of racism, prejudice, and bias. And let's not forget that.
Excellent. We have one more question, and I'm hoping you can answer. I don't know how quickly you can, though. Studies show certain patient characteristics, including race, may predict patient readmissions. Do you have any suggestions for addressing these disparities in terms of the initial steps like data collection and root cause analysis that would then support the creation of systemic solutions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the first thing that I struggle with that is the very word predict. And so that's not accurate to statistics. So I think we have to say correlated, associated with. And I think the other piece is then that leads me to ask the question about what other things are associated with this quote unquote predictability, right? So has there been any studies that correlate patient understanding of what the physician, what nurses, what front desk have communicated? So how much do patients comprehend what's being communicated to them? And is that linked to race? So maybe the study looks a little bit like, Black patients who come in and feel that their physician hasn't communicated the expectations clearly are more likely to be readmitted, right? And so now we start to realize that maybe it has to do with the ways that this physician or this nurse or this dentist or whomever is communicating that is leading to that readmission, that it's not anchored within them. The thing about what racism can do when we are activated is it makes us think that the outcomes are correlated to the person, rather than when we're engaged, we're able to recognize that the outcomes are correlated with the systems of oppression.
Excellent. We thank you so very much, Dr. Crawford, for joining us. This was a fantastic just a fantastic presentation. Thank you. For those of you who are still with us, we invite you to join us for the rest of this month. Join the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge. You can go to urmccelebrates.com. You can sign up there, get daily prompts, bring your whole self to it though. Like Dr. Crawford said, give yourself the time to really invest in the daily challenges. I have an accountability partner who's on my team in the Office of Equity and Inclusion. He just texted me a little while ago and said, did you do the homework? Did you do the readings? And how do you feel? Do you want to talk about it? I love it. It's just really making it, real for me. Please go again to urmccelebrates.com, sign up for the daily challenges, see our schedule, register to hear our other amazing speakers coming up. And you can also go there to learn about a Black medical history maker each day. That's been really fun and wonderful. So Dr. Crawford, have a wonderful, warm rest of your weekend as we dig out from the snow here in Rochester. And to our interpreters, Rashida and Alvin, thank you so very much. To Tracy, our captioner, we appreciate your time with us today. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you again as we continue our 21-day racial equity challenge. Bye-bye, everyone.